At 0550 hours on 6 June 1944, USS Texas opened fire on German positions at Pointe du Hoc. The first 14-inch shell left the forward gun turret and arced through the pre-dawn darkness toward the French coast. The shell weighed 1,400 pounds. It traveled at 2,600 feet per second. The impact 3 seconds later obliterated a German bunker 6 miles away. Another shell followed, then another. The ship fired continuously for 34 minutes. 255 14-inch shells impacted Pointe du Hoc before Texas ceased fire. The bombardment averaged 7.5 shells per minute. This was the longest sustained firing period the ship experienced in World War II. The ship shuddered with each salvo. The deck plating vibrated. Loose objects jumped and clattered. The noise was beyond description. Inside the turrets, the gun crews worked with mechanical precision. Load, ram, close breach, fire. The recoil drove the guns back. The turret filled with smoke and cordite fumes. The crew already had the next shell loaded before the smoke cleared. They had trained for this. 15 months of drilling under Captain Charles Adams Baker. The drills had been relentless. Now they fired for real. Texas was 30 years old. She had been laid down on 17th April 1911 at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia. Launched on 18th May 1912. Commissioned on 12th March 1914. She was a New York-class battleship. Length 573 feet. Beam 95 feet 3 inches. Draft 28 feet 5 inches. Displacement 27,000 tons standard. 32,000 tons full load. Maximum speed 21 knots. Range 10,000 miles at 10 knots. Crew 1,546 officers and men. Her main armament consisted of 10 14-inch 45 caliber guns and 5 twin turrets. 3 turrets forward, 2 aft. The guns could elevate to 15 degrees. Maximum range at 15 degrees elevation was 21,000 yards, approximately 10.5 miles. The shells could penetrate 12 inches of armor at 10,000 yards. The guns fired armor-piercing shells weighing 1,400 pounds or high-explosive shells weighing 1,275 pounds. Secondary armament included 21 5-inch 51 caliber guns mounted in casemates along the hull. These were designed for defense against torpedo boats and destroyers. The anti-aircraft battery had been expanded multiple times. By 1944, it consisted of 6 3-inch 50 caliber guns, 10 40mm Bofors guns in twin mounts, and 44 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The anti-aircraft weapons were needed. German air attacks were expected. The ship had been designed as a gun platform to fight other battleships. Heavily armored, powerfully armed, built to stand in the line of battle and trade salvos with enemy dreadnoughts. That war never came. Texas never fought a surface action against enemy warships. Instead, she became a bombardment platform supporting amphibious landings. The mission was different, but the ship adapted. Old does not mean useless. Texas would prove this repeatedly between 1942 and 1945. She had been modified extensively during her service life. In 1925, she entered Norfolk Navy Yard for major modernization. The work lasted 16 months. Her 14 coal-fired boilers were replaced with 6 oil-fired boilers. This increased her range and reduced crew requirements. Her 2 cage masts were replaced with tripod masts. Her fire control equipment was upgraded. Most significantly, torpedo blisters were added to her hull. The torpedo blisters were additional layers of steel plating welded to the outside of the original hull below the waterline. They extended the beam from 95 feet 3 inches to 106 feet 1 inch. They added approximately 2,000 tons to displacement. The blisters created a void space between the outer blister plating and the original hull. This void space was divided into compartments. If a torpedo struck the blister, it would detonate against the outer plating. The void space would absorb the blast energy. The original hull would remain intact. In theory, the ship would survive a torpedo hit that would have sunk her without the blisters. The blisters had another purpose. They could be flooded selectively to correct list. If the ship was damaged on one side and took on water, the opposite side blister could be flooded to keep the ship level. This was standard damage control practice on battleships with blister protection. Nobody had considered using the blisters deliberately to create a list. Nobody until June 1944. The dawn bombardment at Pointe du Hoc was only the beginning. Texas supported the landings at Omaha Beach throughout D-Day. She moved closer to shore as the morning progressed. From her original firing position, 12,000 yards offshore, she eventually closed to 3,000 yards. Close enough that soldiers on the beach could see her clearly. Close enough that German shore batteries could shoot back. They did. Shells bracketed Texas repeatedly. None hit. She fired continuously. 14-inch shells, 5-inch shells, 3-inch shells, everything she had. On 7 June and 8 June, Texas continued providing fire support. She engaged German reinforcements, artillery batteries, strongpoints. Anything the forward observers requested, the ship expended enormous quantities of ammunition. On 9th June, she returned to Plymouth, England to rearm and resupply. She returned to Normandy on 11th June. From 11 June to 15 June, Texas supported the army as it advanced inland. The soldiers were moving fast. The Germans were retreating. Every day the front line moved farther from the coast. Every day the fire support requests came from positions farther inland. The spotters wanted targets destroyed at increasing ranges. By 15 June, some targets were at the extreme limit of the ship's range. Captain Baker stood on the navigation bridge watching the spotter aircraft circling ahead. The pilot was calling coordinates for 2 German gun positions. Both were firing on advancing American units. Both needed to be destroyed. The gunnery officer calculated the range: 21,300 yards. The 14-inch guns could elevate to 15 degrees maximum. At 15 degrees elevation, the maximum range was 21,000 yards. The targets were 300 yards beyond maximum range. Baker consulted with his gunnery officer and his senior engineer. The situation was clear. The targets needed to be hit. The guns could not reach. The ship could move closer, but that would take time. The soldiers needed fire support immediately. Someone suggested flooding the starboard torpedo blister to create a list. If the ship listed to starboard, the portside guns would be elevated higher than their normal maximum. The increased elevation would extend their range. The concept was sound in theory. Nobody had tried it in practice. The risks were significant. Flooding the blister would reduce stability. The ship would be more vulnerable to capsizing if hit. The list would make damage control more difficult. Manning the anti-aircraft guns would be harder. The crew would be walking on slanted decks. If the flooding could not be controlled, the list might become severe enough to endanger the ship. Baker made the decision in seconds. Flood the starboard blister. Create a 2-degree list. Fire the mission. They had soldiers dying ashore who needed those guns silenced. Everything else was secondary. The engineering crew opened the valves. Seawater poured into the starboard blister compartments. The ship began listing to starboard slowly and steadily. The inclinometers showed the list increasing. 1 degree, 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. Stop flooding. Close the valves. The ship settled at a 2-degree list to starboard. On the port side, the gun crews felt their turret rising. The deck beneath their feet was tilting. The guns were pointing higher than they had ever pointed before. The elevation indicators showed 17 degrees, 2 degrees more than the mechanical stops allowed. The extra elevation came from the ship's list, not from the gun mounts. But the result was the same. The guns could now reach 21,500 yards. Enough to hit both targets. The gunnery officer calculated new firing solutions, accounting for the increased elevation. The range was still extreme. The targets were small. Gun positions dug into hillsides. Hitting them would require precise shooting. The spotters in the aircraft would observe the fall of shot and call corrections. Standard procedure. This would work. The forward 14-inch turret fired first. The shell climbed through a high arc and descended onto the French countryside 6 miles away. The spotter called the impact 200 yards short. The gunnery officer adjusted. The second shell landed 100 yards over. Bracket the target. The third shell hit. The spotter reported the German gun destroyed. The second target took 4 rounds. The position was partially concealed by trees. The spotting was more difficult, but the fourth shell landed directly on target. The spotter confirmed both guns destroyed. Mission accomplished. Total shells expended 24 rounds. Time on target 8 minutes. Baker ordered the blister pumped out. The engineering crew activated the pumps. Water was discharged overboard. The list decreased slowly. The ship returned to level trim within 20 minutes. No damage. No casualties. No complications. The concept worked perfectly. This would be remembered as one of the most innovative improvisations in naval gunfire support history. The internet would later exaggerate the story. Some accounts claim Texas flooded herself on D-Day itself. She did not. The flooding occurred on 15th June, 9 days after D-Day. Some accounts claim she destroyed multiple fortifications with single shots. She fired 24 rounds at 2 targets. Some accounts describe it as a spur-of-the-moment innovation. It was a calculated decision based on sound naval architecture and damage control principles. The blisters existed specifically to hold water. Using them to create a controlled list was simply using existing systems in a non-standard way. But the core fact remains true. USS Texas deliberately flooded part of her own hull to extend the range of her guns. She did this under combat conditions to support soldiers in contact with the enemy. The maneuver required precision, courage, and technical competence. All 3 were present. The story exemplifies Captain Baker's leadership. He was 50 years old. He had graduated from the Naval Academy in 1916. His career had followed the standard path of peacetime naval officers: destroyers, cruisers, battleships, various shore duties. He had served as executive officer of USS Maryland when World War II began. He was then assigned to London as naval attaché. He returned to sea duty when he took command of Texas on 10 March 1944. Baker had arrived to find Texas already a combat veteran. She had earned her first battle star for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa in November 1942. She had bombarded Vichy French positions near Port Lyautey. She had transmitted General Dwight Eisenhower's Voice of Freedom broadcast, urging France not to oppose the Allied landings. She had spent 1943 escorting convoys across the Atlantic. By the time Baker took command, she was an experienced ship with an experienced crew. Baker spent April 1944 training the crew for the Normandy invasion. Gunnery drills, damage control drills, anti-aircraft drills. The ship operated with British battleships HMS Ramillies and Rodney, conducting combined exercises. Royal Air Force aircraft provided spotting practice. The crew learned to coordinate with air spotters and forward observers. The training was intense and continuous. When D-Day arrived, the crew was as ready as training could make them. The performance at Normandy demonstrated the value of that training. Texas fired accurately and continuously for days. The gun crews maintained high rates of fire without breakdown or malfunction. The spotting coordination worked smoothly. The damage control parties responded instantly to every requirement, including the unprecedented flooding of the blister. Baker had prepared his crew well. The success at Normandy was followed by harder fighting. On 25 June, Texas participated in the bombardment of Cherbourg. The port was heavily defended by coastal artillery batteries. The German guns were mounted in massive concrete casemates. They were positioned on high ground with excellent fields of fire. They could reach out to sea and engage bombarding warships. This would be a gun duel. Battleship against fortress. The battleship would be moving. The fortress would not. Texas was part of Task Group 129.2 built around Arkansas and Texas. The ships closed on Cherbourg from seaward while the Army's 7th Corps attacked from landward. The mission was to suppress the coastal batteries and prevent them from interfering with the Army's assault. The German gunners were skilled and determined. They had been fighting for weeks. They knew they were losing, but they would fight anyway. Battery Hamburg east of Cherbourg mounted 4 280mm guns, 11-inch guns. Nearly as large as Texas's 14-inch main battery. The German guns had longer range because they were on high ground. They opened fire at maximum range. Texas maneuvered constantly under Baker's direction. Hard to starboard, hard to port. The helmsman quartermaster, 3rd class, Kristen Christensen, responded instantly to every order. The ship zigzagged and jinked trying to avoid the German salvos. Shells landed close. Geysers of water erupted alongside. Shrapnel whistled overhead. Texas kept firing. The 14-inch guns roared continuously. At 13:16 hours, a German 240mm shell struck. It was a 9.4-inch shell weighing over 200 pounds. The shell skidded across the top of the conning tower. It sheared off the fire control periscope. Pieces of the periscope fell back into the conning tower. They wounded the fire control officer, Lieutenant Commander Richard B. Derrickson, Jr., and 3 others. The shell continued forward. It struck the main support column of the navigation bridge. It exploded. The explosion blew the pilot house deck upward approximately 4 feet. The interior was wrecked. 7 men were wounded. Kristen Christensen was killed instantly. He was the only fatality Texas suffered from enemy action during the entire war. He was 21 years old. He had been at his post steering the ship as ordered. The shell killed him while he was doing his job. Baker was on the starboard bridge wing when the shell hit. The explosion knocked him to the deck. He was uninjured. He got up immediately and assessed the situation. The bridge was wrecked. Wounded men were everywhere. The ship was still under fire. More shells were falling. Baker ordered the bridge cleared. All wounded evacuated below. All uninjured personnel to secondary stations. Steering control was shifted from the bridge to the conning tower. Fire control was shifted from the damaged fire control tower to the plotting room. The ship continued fighting without pause. Texas scored a direct hit on one of Battery Hamburg's guns and destroyed it. She continued engaging targets until ordered to break off. She had been under fire for 3 hours. She had been hit once. She had inflicted more damage than she received. When the smoke cleared, Cherbourg's coastal defenses were suppressed. The Army captured the port. The damaged shell that hit Texas was removed from the wreckage. It had not fully detonated. A bomb disposal crew carefully defused it. The fuse and explosive filling were removed. The empty shell casing was returned to the ship as a trophy. It remains aboard today, a reminder of the only time USS Texas was hit by enemy fire, after Normandy and Cherbourg. Texas participated in Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France on 15 August 1944. The operation was far less difficult than Normandy. German forces had been weakened by withdrawals to reinforce the Normandy front. Resistance was light. Texas bombarded targets near Saint-Tropez. The Army came ashore with minimal opposition. Texas remained on station, but received few fire missions. The Germans were already retreating. In November 1944, Texas was transferred to the Pacific Theater. She transited the Panama Canal. She arrived at Pearl Harbor in January 1945. She underwent repairs and resupply. Her crew was refreshed. On 16th of February 1945, Texas arrived off Iwo Jima. Pre-invasion bombardment began immediately. Iwo Jima was different from Normandy. The Japanese defenses were extensive and deeply dug in. The island was volcanic rock, honeycombed with tunnels and fortified positions. The bombardment lasted 3 days before the Marines landed. Texas fired 923 14-inch shells. She engaged pillboxes, bunkers, artillery positions. Anything spotters could identify? The island was only 8 square miles. Every inch was targeted. The Marines landed on 19th of February. The fighting was savage. Texas provided continuous fire support until 7th of March. She then departed for Ulithi Atoll to rearm and repair minor damage from firing her main batteries continuously for weeks. On 25th March 1945, Texas arrived off Okinawa. Pre-invasion bombardment began immediately. The invasion commenced on 1st April. Texas would remain at Okinawa until 14th May, 50 days, the longest sustained combat operation of her career. Okinawa introduced a new threat: kamikazes. Japanese suicide aircraft deliberately crashed into American ships. The kamikaze attacks were relentless and terrifying. Ships were sunk. Hundreds of sailors died. Texas was constantly at risk. Baker made a controversial decision. The entire crew would remain at general quarters for the duration of the Okinawa operation. No relaxation of readiness. No standing down. Men would sleep at their battle stations. They would eat at their battle stations. They would remain ready to fight instantly. This decision was brutal on the crew. General quarters meant everyone at their assigned combat position. Cooks could not cook. Laundry could not be done. Normal ship's routine stopped. Men lived in gun turrets and ammunition handling rooms and engine spaces. Some positions were cramped and uncomfortable. Some were hot. All were confining. The crew endured for 50 days because Baker convinced them it was necessary. If kamikazes attacked, there would be no time to man the guns. Seconds would determine survival. The crew had to be ready constantly. Texas shot down attacking aircraft. The anti-aircraft crews fired at everything that approached. Some kamikazes were destroyed. Some were driven off. None hit. The ship survived Okinawa undamaged. The decision to remain at general quarters continuously was vindicated. The crew was exhausted but alive. Texas fired her last shots in anger on 13th of May 1945. She had been in combat almost continuously since November 1942, 2.5 years. 4 amphibious operations, thousands of shells fired, innumerable close calls. 1 man killed by enemy action. 1 ship hit once. The record was extraordinary. After Okinawa, Texas participated in Operation Magic Carpet, bringing soldiers home from the Pacific. She transported troops to San Pedro, California, arriving on 15 October 1945. Her war was over. On 21 April 1948, she was decommissioned and transferred to the state of Texas. She became a museum ship at the San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site near Houston. Baker was given command of Texas for one final day on 21st April 1948, so he would have the honor of presenting her to the people of Texas. He retired from the Navy soon after. He died in Florida on 25 December 1970. He was 77 years old. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His crew called him Charlie. They idolized him. His officers said he was the finest navigator and the finest officer they ever knew in the United States Navy. Texas remained at San Jacinto for 73 years. She received visitors constantly. Over 250,000 people annually walked her decks and toured her compartments. They saw the turrets and the bridge and the spaces where men had lived and fought. They read about Normandy and Cherbourg and Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They learned about flooding the blister and extending the range of the guns. The story became part of the ship's legend. By the 21st century, the ship was deteriorating. 70 years of exposure to weather and salt water had taken a toll. The hull was leaking. Structural members were corroding. Major repairs were required. In 2022, Texas was towed to Galveston and placed in dry dock. The repairs would cost $100 million. The money came from Texas state government and federal matching grants and private donations. The repairs were extensive. The torpedo blisters were removed and rebuilt. The hull was replated. Systems were refurbished. On 5 March 2024, Texas left dry dock. She is currently moored at Galveston, undergoing final restoration of her upper works and interior spaces. When the work is complete, she will open to the public again as a museum ship in her new permanent home. The Battleship Texas Foundation operates her. They maintain her. They tell her story. The flooding of the torpedo blister on 15th June 1944 remains her most famous moment. The story illustrates improvisation and technical competence and willingness to take calculated risks to accomplish the mission. These are enduring military virtues. They were displayed by an old battleship that everyone had wanted to scrap in 1938, but that went on to fight in both World Wars and earn 5 battle stars. Texas was obsolete by 1944 standards. The new Iowa-class battleships were faster, better armed, better protected, better in every measurable way. But Texas could do something the Iowas could not. She could draw less water and operate closer to shore. Her age became an advantage. She had nothing to prove. She could be risked in ways new ships could not. She became the Navy's premier shore bombardment platform because she was expendable and because her crew made her effective. The technical innovation at Normandy demonstrated what experienced crews can accomplish. The concept of flooding a blister to extend gun range was not in any manual. Nobody had thought of it because it had never been necessary. When it became necessary, someone thought of it and the captain approved it and the crew executed it flawlessly. This is how wars are won. Not through rigid adherence to doctrine, but through intelligent adaptation to circumstances. The story also demonstrates the importance of understanding your equipment. The officers and crew of Texas knew exactly how their ship worked. They knew the capabilities and limitations of every system. They knew the blisters could be flooded because that was standard damage control procedure. They extrapolated from standard procedure to novel application. The knowledge was there. The creativity was there. The willingness to try something unconventional was there. The combination produced success. Modern naval vessels have far greater capabilities than Texas ever possessed. Modern fire control systems allow precision strikes at ranges Texas could not have imagined. Modern propulsion gives speeds Texas could never match. Modern damage control uses systems Texas never had. But the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Know your ship. Know your mission. Adapt to circumstances. Execute with precision. Texas exemplified all of these. The ship sits in Galveston today, undergoing restoration. The hull has been rebuilt. The blisters have been replaced with new steel, fabricated to the original design. The compartments that held seawater on 15 June 1944 are empty now, but they could be flooded again if needed. The valves still exist. The piping still exists. The capability remains, even though it will never be used again. When Texas reopens to the public, visitors will walk the same decks Captain Baker walked. They will see the same gun turrets that fired on Normandy. They will visit the bridge where Kristen Christensen died at his post. They will learn about flooding the blisters and extending the gun range. The story will be told again and again because it captures something essential about human ingenuity and determination. An old ship, an impossible mission, a creative solution, a successful outcome. This is the story of USS Texas at Normandy. This is why the story matters 75 years later. Not because flooding a blister was technically impressive, though it was, not because it saved lives, though it did, but because it demonstrates that old systems and old crews can still accomplish new things if they are willing to think creatively and act boldly. Texas earned 5 battle stars in World War II. She fought in 4 amphibious operations. She was the only Allied battleship to participate in all 4. Operation Torch, Normandy, southern France. Iwo Jima, Okinawa. She supported soldiers and Marines in all of them. She fired thousands of shells. She destroyed hundreds of targets. She saved countless lives by suppressing enemy positions that would have killed American troops. Her contribution to victory was significant, but she was never famous. The new battleships got the publicity. Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri. These were the ships that made headlines. Texas operated quietly in the background, doing the unglamorous work of shore bombardment. The soldiers she supported appreciated her. The public ignored her. This pattern continued after the war. The museum ship received visitors, but she was never a major tourist attraction. She was always the forgotten battleship. But history remembers. Texas is the last dreadnought battleship in existence. Every other dreadnought has been scrapped. She is the only survivor of the naval revolution that occurred between 1906 and 1920. She represents a type of warship that dominated naval warfare for 4 decades and then became obsolete almost overnight. She is a physical connection to a vanished era. She is also a memorial to everyone who served aboard her during 3 decades of commissioned service. The crew who took her to Mexico in 1914, the crew who joined the Grand Fleet in 1918, the crew who bombarded North Africa in 1942, the crew who fought at Normandy in 1944, the crew who endured 50 days at General Quarters off Okinawa in 1945. All of them are honored by her preservation. Kristen Christensen is buried far from Texas. His death was the only combat fatality the ship suffered. 1 man killed in 3 years of combat operations. The low casualty rate was partly luck and partly the result of good seamanship and good leadership. Baker maneuvered constantly under fire. The damage control parties were well trained. The anti-aircraft crews were alert and accurate. Everything worked as it should, except for 1 shell at Cherbourg. 1 shell that found the bridge. 1 man killed. The shell casing that killed him is still aboard the ship. The empty casing. Diffused and harmless now. A piece of steel. A reminder? The bridge has been rebuilt multiple times since 1944, but the shell remains. Visitors see it and ask about it. The docents explain, 1 shell, 1 hit, 1 casualty. The only time Texas was hit by enemy fire in 34 years of commissioned service spanning 2 world wars. The story ends where it began, at Galveston. The old battleship being restored to her wartime configuration. The torpedo blisters rebuilt to original specifications. The compartments that were flooded on 15th of June 1944 replaced with new steel but to the same design. The ship preserved for future generations. The story preserved with her. USS Texas. The ship that flooded herself to extend her range. The ship that refused to be defeated by obsolescence or age or enemy fire. The ship that served when needed and adapted when required. The last dreadnought. The forgotten battleship. The old lady who still had one last trick when it mattered most.